Hi, everyone. Welcome to Turning Point. I'm your host, Blaine Bertsch, co-founder and CEO at Dryrun. And joining me today is Satyam Kantamneni of UX Reactor, managing partner there, chief experience officer. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I love UX, I love design. And so this is right up my alley. Thanks for joining me.
I'm glad to be here, Blaine. I appreciate it.
And before I always love to get started with finding out how you got started as an entrepreneur. Like, where was the first little nugget that you wanted to get into business?
Uh, I would say I'd answer it two ways. The first way is I think I've always wanted to do something and create stuff, right? And that's kind of I would say the entrepreneurial instinct has always been there. Uh, and then you're looking for the spark to kind of get that there. So my true entrepreneurial pursuit in this particular context started out 8 years back. But that was with the spark of saying like, hey, I think the way it's happening is not happening well. And I have a different way of doing it. And I want to try that out. So I call my existing firm my life's biggest experiment. And so that's how it started. And then obviously as an entrepreneur, you're trying to build a business model around it. You're trying to build sustainability around it. So again, that's how the journey started. But dabbling in doing different initiatives, I think it goes back as a young kid too, right? Trying to open a library that was unsuccessful, or trying to do door-to-door sales has its own challenges. So again, entrepreneurial instinct has always been there, but doing it at scale is obviously something that's been more recent.
It's such a familiar story, right? Like, just I have a yet to talk with an entrepreneur that's like, yeah, I just went in it for the money. Like, no, it's I wanted to change something, I wanted to fix something, I saw an opportunity, and but I shared that experience like you have, kind of going door to door and doing sales, and that really prepares you down the road for figuring out how to do sales, I want to dive into that a little bit because that was something I turned out I had a bit of a natural sales ability I didn't know I had. Was that something that you found as well?
To be honest, I would never put myself in the bucket of sales. I still think of it as a different skill, especially having spent such a long time being a technical expert.
Mm-hmm.
But when you go back to the basis, I mean, absolutely. I mean, you're going and trying to see where the need is, what the pain is for someone, and trying to say, I have a solution for you, and just finding the triggers for what pains someone, and then saying, I have a way to solve that for you, is what I call like good sales cycle. But knowing that and being an expert in that it's still I say I'm still a student of that. But the fact that the best sale is where someone wants water and you're giving them water and you're charging them for that. And I'm just giving an analogy, but I think that's what I've learned even when I was doing door-to-door sales, because I would say, in fact, I've had doors slammed at me. I've had people call me into their homes and then get me to talk to their whole family and kind of give them guidance, because I was selling computer education for a computer institute, which was pretty big in India at that point, and going door to door and telling people why they should sign up for a program or a course. And as I said, I mean, the people that don't have the need, they don't care about you. People who have the need, they will treat you like, you're God's second coming.
Yeah, it's like I just turned 50 last year, and I think it was literally about a year or two ago that I realized I had done sales. like I've owned businesses, and I don't remember the conversation I was having, and I'm like, well, who do I know that's done sales? I wanted to that, and I'm thinking and thinking and thinking, and all of a sudden it's like the first time in my life I'm like, wow, I sold millions of dollars of services and never viewed it as sales. I never viewed myself as a salesman, right? But it was almost like acknowledging that and learning that all of a sudden went, oh, I get it. This is how I used to do it so much with relationships. And like we just finding the problem and can we solve the problem, and is it a good match? But sort of recognizing it was sort of a skill that I had also kind of helped me tap into, well, I can actually refine it and improve it now that I've acknowledged that it's a thing, right?
Absolutely. And I think, again, in today's generation, sales has also taken a different life of its own. There's a lot more technicality involved, especially with digital sales, digital, marketing, etc. But the essence is still like you're trying to find people that have a pain, and you want to be the painkiller for them.
Yeah.
And so you're cleaning up your offerings, you're cleaning up the structure. So all that stuff obviously was self-learned, and I would say the biggest learning I had to learn, coming after doing close to 15 years in the technical side, where sales was someone else's problem, delivery
Mhm.
and service was mine. Again, having worked for product companies, that was one thing I wish I had spent more time fine tuning before the entrepreneurial journey. But then in the essence, when you go back to the foundation, it is precisely that. I mean, I've had conversations with people where, yeah, months and months, but nothing's coming out of it. And then I've also had conversation like, in a matter of a day, you kind of go there, but just because of how deep the pain is and how well you
Yeah.
can solve it.
Yeah. So you mentioned you were in kind of a technical role. So before you kind of in sandwiched in between, like before you became this entrepreneur 8 years ago, where did you start, like in industry and business, and where did like I guess what were you doing that eventually led to that point?
So I actually had a pretty successful corporate career. I graduated. I came to the United States as a young student, and studied a program that no one knew would kind of take off so much. And I studied something called human-computer interaction before the dot-com boom,
Hmm.
and as the market took off, more technology was coming on to the market, and more organizations were starting to need technology being more easier to use and so on. So a whole role of user experience and design started becoming more and more pervasive. So I joined in that journey in many organizations. I started a small agency in Ohio, and then ended up working for Fidelity in Florida. Then PayPal relocated me to the Bay Area, and then that's when I first got my full experience in building teams and growing teams. And again, a company like PayPal at that point was one of the dot-com darlings, and working under the eBay family. So it got full exposure of how e-commerce and transactions at millions of scales work, and how experience can kind of fine-tune that. So I ended up there as a designer, then became a design leader, and then was recruited to a software company called Citrix, to come build a design organization there. Spent 6 years building that whole organization, pretty sizable team across the globe, and build that team out. But so that's kind of how I ended up where I was. I had gotten all the titles, I'd done all the good things. You get all the perks of being in a large company. But I also think that also was to kind of bring it back to your first question: how did I start my entrepreneurial journey? I also call it the lost decade, the decade where, personally, if I look back and I said, what impact did I make? The impact was still people and process, but not business. Getting into a much bigger trajectory. And that was
Hmm.
a fundamental challenge for me, because I've seen, and we all have seen, technology companies that have done insanely well when the meld of experience and technology comes together. I just felt that I was not doing that. And I felt that there was something missing, that many organizations were not able to get to that escape velocity on that side. And that's what became my firm calling. And I said, let's start with it in a much more foundational level, looking back at the people, the process, the mindsets, the environment, and let's kind of adjust to that, and then see whether we can truly change the trajectory of any organization that we touch, where they can
Hmm.
truly see the value of design and business coming together.
It's like it's such a sort of, again, a familiar area for me. Like I was I have both a bachelor's and master's in design, and spent a lot of time. I had a creative agency for over a decade before Dryrun, and so this is all really close to my heart. And it's interesting because it feels like you, and I guess suppose me at the same time, were a little bit on the forefront as this whole idea of user experience design kind of came to be. I don't really think it existed before. If it did, it wasn't, of course, in a digital
Right.
world. And it's become such a fundamental need and driver for business, because it making things easy and pleasurable and everything else for users is so incredibly important. Um, how did you, I guess, sort of end up in this space? Like what drove you? Was it when you were kind of back going to school, or was it the opportunity of that kind of first job in industry? What sort of got you excited about this?
I think it's a little bit of everything. I actually studied engineering. I studied electronics and design and communication engineering. So so I would still think there's a batch of people that I graduated with that they think when I say I'm a designer, they think I'm a chip designer. I'm just half jokingly
Yeah.
saying that. But the bigger thing was I was fortunate enough, and I say, as an entrepreneur, and including in my life, I feel that there's a lot of luck and things that kind of come together. I was very fortunate enough to discover a program called Human Factors Engineering, where I could start looking at the psychology of how people use technology, and got accepted to that program, and obviously did well in the program. And then when you start understanding the why behind why people do how they do things, you actually become a much better engineer. That was the foundational aspect. And I felt like, yeah, I wish someone told me that, that electromagnetic theory that I studied was relevant because of this particular issue that it makes go away for a user.
Mhm.
I would have been much better as an engineer. But anyway, as I went through that line of working, I was fascinated by the why, and that made me a user researcher. So I started my career as a user researcher, studying the why, the how, the journeys, etc., of users. And fortunately, that intrigued me. So I started an agency right after that, where I was a researcher. But as an agency, you kind of play so many hats. So I was like starting to get intrigued by everything else that why was triggering, and
Mhm.
ended up dabbling in the design. And again, coming from an engineering background, it was hard to leave that behind. You start understanding the system architecture of, okay, that why is not happening because of this system architecture, or that why is happening because this is needs to be designed or thought through. And that allowed me to kind of become a much better system designer, or
Mhm.
interaction designer. And so I dabbled into interaction design. I was starting to do that. And fortunately, there were some big initiatives that came to my plate, where they were designing the customer service software for a couple of different organizations. One, and then completely started applying that process of, like, why is the workflow of this agent working this way? What if we gave him or her this
Mhm.
data? What would that change? And you start looking at all these experiments, and you start and run these experiments, and you're like, oh, this worked, this didn't work, and this adjusted. And then you start collectively building and redesigning a system, and then you see the value it makes in millions of dollars, because every call that can be solved, and that thing is another $10 saved for the next call. And then you
Mhm.
start seeing the numbers, and you're like, man, this is fascinating. And that's kind of what excited me, continued going deeper and deeper into that line of work. Then the next company hired me to kind of do their whole enterprise software tool set, and that ended up bringing me to PayPal. So again, just got sucked into that line of work, but I was having fun. And then
Mhm.
as I got into the leadership side and started understanding the organizational design and the impact of that, I think that's when I realized that, it's actually a fascinating line of work that's not driving full value for many organizations, and that became my calling to start this firm.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I'm sure you have a story of early on in your sort of user experience testing where it really hits you, how odd people can behave when they're doing stuff in a digital world, right? Like, where did because it's commonplace to me now. Like I've literally said to my team, it's like, picture someone coming into our software and they're a squirrel. Like, because they're going to go everywhere and do this, and it's going to be totally unexpected. And it's just from years of seeing that, like, just, what was it first? Like, do you remember a time when it was like, just push the button, like, like where it hit you really hard that it's like, this is going to be tricky because people don't behave necessarily the way you expect them to.
Absolutely, and it happens so many times. In fact, in our line of work, as everyone's aware, what they say and what they do and what they feel is very different. And especially as you're building features and you're designing features and you're testing features, what actually happens a lot of times is the intuition of where you put that feature is itself lost. So that's most time they don't even. I've seen issues where people are like struggling to find where is that button. It's right in front of you. In their
Mhm.
mental model, it's not mapping to it. So they're looking somewhere else. They're not finding it. Once they find it, they actually are interacting with it a little different. They're not because that's not mapping to their workflow. So you start
Yeah.
observing these nuances and it's hard because you had spent a lot of time designing it and you had thought this would work sequentially, and
Yeah.
time and time again, I see so many people, including ourselves. I've seen the same mistake on my side. We design it on a whiteboard, we iterate on it, we build all these hypotheses, we kind of engineer it, put it out there, only for them to see that they're not getting it, they don't understand it, they're not prepped for it, they kind of give up for the things. Semantics matter,
Mhm.
right? And I'll tell you this as a story. When I was working for a financial company, uh, as if there's something that was going wrong with that in that transaction, if they flag it even a little bit, any algorithm flags it, they restrict your
Mhm.
account. That means they say, show us that you need to that you are who you are and your intent to do what you're doing, so we can, before we unlock your account. But when they call
Mhm.
the call center, the data that was shown up on was that your account is frozen, and now this is someone's money. Someone's money has been restricted. They are kind of already going crazy,
Mhm.
so now the big thing is the call center saying your account's frozen, and they're like, no, it's not frozen, it's restricted. And that, you can see that kind of going back and forth, and then both of them are not sure why they're getting pissed off and what's triggering them, but money triggers so many people in so many ways. And that's also something, as designers, we have to understand, that they're feeling that that word kind of invokes in them. And all that, we need to go back and change the message and say, normally it takes about 10 to 10 to 12 hours to unlock it, so just give us this information. So that reassurance that you give us, we'll give it back to you. You give this information, we give it back to you, was all that it took to kind of just make it easier for someone and more palatable as someone goes through that transaction. Anyway, these are some simple things that you start observing. You start, and you put a research study, you start kind of thinking through. But everyone comes in a different context,
Mhm.
and the way someone would approach it on day zero of their interaction with that product versus day 99 of their interaction is very, very different. So you have to think through
Mhm.
all those nuances. Again, this is I wish I had, I wish I had done my master's after I had worked in a call center, because I understood psychology much better.
Yeah, yeah, and it's such a challenging area because people can be completely unpredictable at times, and so different, and yet there's things that it feels like when you design it right, it's like you start they sort of come down to that point where by and large it works, even though they're coming from they're distracted and there's a million different things. They come down to that point, and it reminds me of a story. One of my a professor that was one of my advisors when I was doing my master's degree. And he was telling a story about I think I'm pretty sure it was an airline had approached him and a colleague to design communications to explain how you open the emergency door. And I don't know, I remember if it was him or if he was telling me this story. I can't remember because this is like 20 years ago. But basically the story goes that it was presented as a design problem, a communication problem of explain how to open the door, and they went through the process and then went to the airline and said, you have to redesign the door.
There you
Like
go. Yeah.
that's the problem. You can't explain it. You got to redesign that. And so it was just it's sort of interesting where sometimes an unexpected conclusion. It's like, yeah, you actually have to pick up and redo this part because it's not as simple as explaining it or naming it or making the button blank, right?
Absolutely. And again, this is especially as you get into these, I would say, uh, critical systems, systems like healthcare, systems like aerospace. Uh, the cost of a mistake is huge,
Mm-hmm.
and again, human factors as a profession or as a line of study came in from Second World War, when complex systems like or critical systems like cockpits or dashboards, or and they were called HMIs, human machine interfaces, at that point, was started
Mm-hmm.
to come to the fore. And one of the common stories is an airline created a fighter jet where the arm your weapon switch was right next to eject switch, and they both had the same affordance.
Whoa.
And so in the fog of war, everyone, and then they saw the data showed that many people were bailing out right before they entered enemy territory. And then they realized, and they assumed this was just people just calling it out and just saying, I don't want to fight this war. But it effectively was that in that high stress environment, you really are not seeing the switches, because you could be hit by enemy anti-aircraft anytime. And at that point, you're trying to just go by affordance, and your eject switch is right there next to the arm your weapons. And these
Yeah.
are nuances that can kind of change the trajectory. Same,
Mhm.
healthcare systems. I fortunate enough to work on a breast biopsy instrument very early in my career, and then you realize that the doctors focused on the patient. They're not focused on hitting those panels. They're just
Mhm.
they're giving commands, say increase suction, decrease suction, and that words are important, and how that is kind of assumed by the technician. So I
Mhm.
when I sat in the office as a designer, I was assuming that the doctor is hitting those suction numbers up and down. And so these are all nuances that you understand, and you design better. And when you design better, it works better. It works better. Then,
Yeah.
obviously the businesses make a lot more, and more importantly, the outcomes are much better for the patients.
Yeah. And you talked about, because we used to do the exact same thing. 16 feet of whiteboards, and we're drawing, and we're smart. Like, man, you're so smart when you're designing all of that on a whiteboard and talking about it. And then as soon as you get a user in, and it reminds me of Mike Tyson saying, "Everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face." Like, yeah, that's how it works.
Now, Blaine, what is still very challenging, and I must say this, that as much as you and I believe that that's the right way of doing it, 40% of the products still get shipped without talking to a user.
Yeah.
And that is where I kind of find it very hard. Like, why is someone just writing off checks without any return on investment being planned
Yeah.
for these engineering features and so on and so forth? And that's kind of still is what, as I say, that there's so many minimum, like I would say, low hanging fruit for business leaders. And again, there's a gazillion reasons. The reasons they give
Yeah.
the same, which is like, oh, I want to go to market first, or don't want my users to know what I'm doing. I don't need to ask them what to do. But again, irrespective, I mean, the risk is too big.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny, because even in our own businesses, it's become almost addictive. Like, I remember when we started Dryrun, we're building the product and everything, and it was a little more systematic. Well, we'll build, and then we'll get to here, and then okay, and then we have to talk to a user. It was like, you have to, and okay, we know, because I know it's important, and we'd watch, and we'd learn these hard lessons, and then, but what over time it switched over to now, if it's like, if we have a chance to like talk to a user, and it's like everyone wants to pile in, like they all want to come. It's like, well, can I come too? Like,
Right.
everyone wants to pile in and watch, because they're like, all right, hang on, this is going to be great. Because it's amazing how much you can learn from even a single user. And sometimes it'll just hint at something that, yeah, let's kind of keep an eye on that. And other times it's a total head slapper. Like, immediately, like, yeah, totally missed that. Everyone's tripping on that. And it can be just like a wealth of information.
Absolutely, and I'll give you in fact, a very live example. I was just having a meeting with my team right before this. A client came to us, and they're like, "Hey, so it's a security camera company, and they're like, hey, we have to release this before the Black Friday season starts." And we are like, and the leadership believes that they need to do testing. So they're not saying they should not, but they're like, I
Yeah.
don't think we'll have enough time by the time it kind of is going to be ready, and we need to kind of put it in packaging. And the whole conversation it was a hard push with the internal sponsors and us together, saying, do you realize the risk that's kind of being brought onto the organization? You're going to ship 1 million units without knowing whether it actually is easy to onboard or not. But somehow they figured out the budget. They kind of did it. We found 12 friction points, and immediately overnight, the whole company, stickers were being ordered to be put on the boxes so that people could figure out the quick service guide. So that was the thing about, you asked me the question of when you see a user. We assume that the quick service guide, people will open it, read it, but the quick service guide was written in two different languages, and it was a Z fold, and that one Z fold design automatically put two languages. Uh, if not open the right way, the two languages would kind of conflict with each other. So it was
Yeah.
just that one usability issue was kind of causing issue. People not knowing that they had to download an app for this to work was
Yeah.
there. So that sticker got put on there. So all those things kind of got changed overnight. Obviously, it took a lot of money to kind of do that, but now
Yeah.
they actually have a very successful selling product. And I was just talking to them before the meeting, and then they're like, "Yeah, we fixed those things, and now we are good." And I'm like, "Man, what was the return on investment on that?" And it was about
Yeah.
10x.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it's a good reminder for there's businesses, there's sort of people that aren't necessarily involved on that front end product side, and especially they're not really responsible for the onboarding and that, and they can be a bit dismissive, but it is so fundamentally important. It's like even when I'm thinking about, like, you're mentioning like a product like that, think about how many of them would get returned just from someone getting confused, right?
A bad review, a return. I mean, you build products, good products. I mean, a lot of engineering work has gone in it. I mean, it's really smart product, but then you don't want it to be returned because you couldn't figure out that, the quick service guide was not opening up, which honestly, in many organizations, which is why I say that you need a single leader that drives all of experience, because that is like, packaging is a different department. They'll figure it out after everything else is figured out. No, that one packaging can screw up everything else. It's a multiplicative effect for everything to work. No, I think it's fascinating. Again, that's why I say we design is such a big driver that unfortunately many companies don't understand how to unravel it, and when they do, it's very hard to go back.
Yeah, it really is, and it's and I found it such amazing work, because it's just so interesting, right? Like, it's so interesting from not like design this or do that, but it's that side where you're talking about users and trying to figure out how to help them and how to move them through, and you have to be so it's not, the patient isn't the right word. It's like you can't be arrogant. Like, you just have to be like, see it for what it is and learn from it and just observe it, and totally disconnect yourself from, I created this and I'm frustrated because it's not working. You have to take it as excitement that you can really improve something, right?
Absolutely. I think there's different kinds of people, and I think this is also in the entrepreneurial DNA. The people that look at a problem and kind of feel defeated by it, or they look at a problem and say that I need to defeat it somehow, right? And I think entrepreneurs are more the latter, that they need to kind of defeat the problem themselves, and that's kind of is the foundational thing. And this line of work allows us to see so many problems and so many contexts. Just within this year, I mean, I've worked with users and systems that they're using in oil rigs, and mining stations, to people that are hoteliers using a software. So I mean, you just get so much variety of work. And I mean, again, I'm living a dream when you kind of get to observe so many things. You go to a hotel and see how the people are working, go to a mine and see how they're working. It's just fascinating. And each one has a different context and user needs.
One of the most fun customers we ever had in my agency days, and this again was going back over 15 years ago, but we were doing e-learning materials for the fire department, and it was amazing because we got to go to like all their training facilities. We did ride-alongs on their like, we did everything. And there's one time there was a brush fire south of town, and also we get a phone call, and it's like, you guys got to be out there to film. You need this. This is a great opportunity. So I'm driving down to this sort of country road, and there's a police blockade, and all the media is there. And I drive up, and then he looks at me and he just waves me through. And I'm like, where do I go? He goes, go down about a mile and park by the fire truck. And so I see all the media are like, who the heck's that guy? Right? So I drive down the road, parking my car in the ditch behind a fire truck. And then we got out, and it was, unfortunately, but we had a helicopter coming in. They only had room for one camera. One had to be on the ground, and so we flipped a coin, and my partner got to go up in the helicopter, and I had to chase her out of the ground. But it was just absolutely fascinating. Absolutely. Seeing all of this, and you learn so much about watching them do their job, right? And it was such a great client of ours, because it was just incredibly interesting the entire time. And you also felt you're doing stuff that would have impact for them too, right?
Absolutely. I think because the context also defines a lot of the experience, right? And when you truly understand the problem, the context, the user, that's when magic can kind of come together when you're solving it.
Yeah. I want to go back though a little bit so you started this business 8 years ago, and I always find that it's, no matter what happens, it feels like you really get your feet under you in a business around year 5. So tell me about year 1. how did you just get started, and where did you go? How did you get your first customer? How did you get that off the ground?
To be honest, I mean, again, I founded it with my brother, so both of us were like-minded. I think that we lucked out when you have people with the same value systems, and
Mm-hmm.
it's good. That's one good thing of working with a sibling. There's other things that are also not great, but especially that kept us very much rooted on that. Both of us have had corporate careers, so we were financially in a better state. Both of us had very supportive spouses, so that also was there. So I think the mindset is very important of when you're starting to become an entrepreneur. So
Mm-hmm.
for us was like, okay, let's try it out for 6 months. So for me, this journey has always been recommitting every year. And so the first 6 months was like, okay, what's the first experiment we want to run? We want to run that the talent that's out in the market, the process that's being run in the market is not the best. So let's create our own process. Let's create our own talent. So that was the first
Mm-hmm.
6 month cycle that we started with. And that's all we focused on. We focused very much on like, let's build the best problem solvers who understand user-centered design and can
Yeah.
leverage that. The first client, to your question, came from the perspective of just calling all your network and saying, folks, we are here to do work for you. I want to experiment. The next experiment was, can these people that we generated with this process deliver value? Pay us whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was basically, so again, the next level of experimentation was that. Our first check was somebody that had worked with a design agency, a reputable design agency. But then most agencies, unfortunately, they do the most of the heavy visioning work, but the last mile, which is a long mile, is left alone with the company, and there was a lot of
Mm-hmm.
gaps. And so they said, hey, we have this issue, can you come in? I said, absolutely. $5,000 is all we made for what we would now charge, way more than that. But
Yeah.
that's what we said. Okay, give us whatever. That just give us
Yeah.
what value we create. And that ended up becoming a first client. The team kind of got its feet under, because at that point everything was theory. So we said let's go for it, and did that work. Did it way better than anybody else, and
Mm-hmm.
because we spent the time, the system that we were thinking was exactly the same. Is you need to understand the problem, you need to ask the right questions, you need to workshop it, you need to ideate on it and experiment it. So that's what we
Mm-hmm.
did with them. Did really well. That company did well. Then that became a next renewal, and then we had built that into some offerings. Started talking to more people.
Mm-hmm.
Slowly and steadily started kind of getting the initial work always comes from your network that believes in you more than
Yeah.
the system. Then, as you said, as the business evolved, then people start trusting the system, and then you become secondary. And so that's been the journey all through.
Yeah. It's yeah, it's such. I always find that really fascinating too, is just how businesses sort of get off the ground. Because, from I think people that haven't run a business or are not an entrepreneur, it's sometimes it'll be a bit mysterious from the outside, and it looks like you just open up your door and it's all good. You're just going, and it's no, like it takes a lot of this step by step and learning and figuring it out. And you have clients in the meantime, and hard lessons and great lessons, and you know. Where did you feel like, when did you feel you were sort of hitting your stride, like, yeah, it's becoming the usual now, we got this going?
I think I don't think there's ever been a steady state that has come through. It feels great right now, and a few months later, it feels like, holy cow, this is it's gonna all wheels are gonna come off.
Yeah.
I think it started feeling like a business. I would say truly 4 years later. So
Mm-hmm.
we started in 2015. Around 2019, we kind of got a project where somebody said, "Hey, we have this large Big Five consulting firm that came and did stuff, and they couldn't do it well, and so we had to fire them. Can you come in and do it?"
Mm-hmm.
And we are like, we've never done that caliber. Not so again, I have done it, but my team hasn't done that level of caliber working in the coattails of a Big Five consulting firm.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
took that as a challenge. We did that, and then we did an awesome job. And when we, so again, to that saying of like, in this case, yes, it was not IBM, but as this adage goes, that no one gets fired to hire IBM. In this case, that person would have been fired to hire a kind of an IBM.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
we had the boutique had to come in and kind of resolve that. So that truly gave us a true confidence of saying, yes, I think now we have emerged. Our process has emerged. Our people have emerged. We can compete with the best and deliver. And then right after that, we had one of our prospective clients come in and start kicking the tires and saying, we want to acquire you. And that's when the diligence process matured us a lot. We decided
Mhm.
that was not the right time for us. We have still more value to create, but that diligence process truly matured us from being an experiment to being a business. And
Yeah.
because then how someone looks at you, how someone is evaluating you, valuing you, gives you a third person view of like, oh, okay, this is what this is working, this is not working. And so that
Yeah.
actually allowed us to then kind of get our act together a little bit more structured manner. But again, it was it was also the pandemic, so it was not the easiest time to kind of make any big shifts. But I would say that's when we truly matured as a firm, and we started thinking like this is a firm, this is a proper enterprise, and it generates employment, it generates value. So how do we do that
Mhm.
at scale?
Yeah. And you mentioned something that, like, well, I'm so familiar with it. It's partly the reason why created Dryrun. Was, yeah, it looks great today, but a few months down the road, it might be like,
Yep.
what's going on? And that was something that we faced, all the time, and a lot of our customers are facing that. With, we always call it the lumpy sales and lumpy cash flow,
Yeah.
and the peaks and valleys, and the sleepless nights mixed with the restful nights, right? Yeah, it's seem it, like, just to let you know, like, it crosses verticals everywhere. If it's a big deal, and uh you're always looking in a way for that next project. That's just it's just part of it, right? That was part of what led me to start Dry Run, is because we can help people look forward and
Yep.
address some of that before it hits. But those are lessons I didn't know about before I started a business. They're the ones you learn the hard way, right?
Absolutely. And see, again, every project was a project, and we were saying yes to everyone. I think the discipline of saying no to who, and who are you? Do you want to say more yeses to? I think that all got matured over a period of time.
Yeah.
What are we selling? Like, who are we selling it to? What is our process? How can we do it in a replicable manner? How can we do it with a better quality? How do we know the quality of
Mm-hmm.
quality? So I think these are all nuances that we didn't have in place. So
Yeah.
it felt very, very clear. And again, how do I plan for next year? So one of the things about forecasting, 2021 December, we were refusing work because we
Mm-hmm.
just couldn't have the capacity. So we said, okay, let's hire capacity, because we had a process on internally where we had to groom talent. It took us 6 months to get someone up and running.
Mm-hmm.
And so end of 2022, we actually, so we put all the profits into grooming. And so forecasting was, let's hire more people and then groom them. We will have the same demand. Late 2022, the demand kind of became soft. So now we have more
Mm-hmm.
people. And so these are all nuances that you don't kind of think through. Fortunately,
Yeah.
one thing as a leadership team we kind of did, we said, we're going to run a very conservative company. We're going to have a much higher balance because it takes a while to groom these people. So we don't want
Mm-hmm.
to let go. And most other agencies have a strategy of hire fast, fire fast. I mean, what as demand goes on. We said no, that doesn't work for our policy. So we had a much bigger cash balance that we kind of banked. So that allowed us to kind of
Mm-hmm.
to kind of take care of that. But again, forecasting has been an we forecasted the wrong variables. We didn't forecast demand at the same time, and we didn't model demand and supply at the same ways. So these are all
Yeah.
nuances that I think we're all learning. Every day is a new day.
Yeah. Yeah, we like I always tell people, I learned about all of that in 2008. Before that,
Yeah,
we thought we had everything straight. We thought we
absolutely.
knew what was going on, and I've told this story to people before, but like there are two really impactful things. One, um, when the wheels kind of fell off the economy, all of a sudden it's like, can we make payroll Friday? That was suddenly top of mind, where it wasn't before, right? And but then it started to figure out. I remember looking at a sales pipeline. It was actually just a list of deals, and I realized that day, I looked at the bottom of it, and it was like seven figures sitting on the bottom of the spreadsheet, and I looked at it and went, if it all comes in at once, we
Yeah,
don't have the capacity. If it takes too long to come in, we're not making enough money.
right.
And that was almost like that's when I started to lay it out onto a timeline. And then I saw the peaks and valleys in the timeline and looked at last year and went, okay, what were the peaks and valleys last year? And that's when I realized, oh my God, have we left a lot of money on the table? And after that, we got very disciplined on figuring out like what's our sales pipeline timing as well, so that we know capacity, we see the peaks, we see the valleys.
Absolutely.
And then you overlay that with all the costs, right? And it like lifted a cloud up, and suddenly it's like, and it's not like things got easy, but we knew how to address them beforehand, so we weren't getting these shocks every day.
Absolutely. I think as the business grows, the leadership needs to slow down, and they need to think more, they're deliberate more, and be more deliberate. And I think that was what I learned the hard way. And I think everything you're stating there is exactly the same. It's like you need to be more aware, more clear. And again, I've not used Dryrun, but I've assumed the tool would actually would allow you to kind of do exactly the same. But things that we didn't have before. I mean, we were just like, okay, we're getting one more project, let's do it. We'll figure it out. And one of the challenges in our business was we had this like, if anybody can't do it, we could do it, that attitude. And that attitude has a cockiness to it, also can deliver a lot of good work, but also meant that everything is like, we're not a professional army. We are just like, a group of, folks. To be a professional army, you need a lot more deliberateness. And I think, so that was a lesson that we kind of all have now, at least the leadership team is much more aware of. And I think deliberateness is completely the theme, and to replicate and deliberate. And
it's funny because it's just, oh man, we went through the same thing because we were doing so much digital stuff, and we got a reputation for doing stuff that no one else had done. Like we were doing like the first sort of touch screen sort of kiosk stuff. And I think we had the first HD camera in our town outside of a TV station. And it only had it only had a Japanese, like guide. So we're like, but it was always, we would get so excited when it was something new and, oh, it's such a challenge. And like you said, it's like you get a little cocky and you go, yeah, we can do it. But boy, that costs a lot of money because you're inventing all the time, and the clients aren't really paying you for all the inventing time.
Absolutely.
And unless you're doing it again and again, you learn from it. But there's, like you said, like that, the well-oiled machine stuff always seems to be over the next hill. You're always doing something new, and that it's fun, but boy, it can be a challenge. It can be a challenge on your cash flow and your revenue all the time, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's I say, an entrepreneurial story is great. The journey is got its ebbs and flows.
Yeah, and it's some of the things you mentioned too that I remember we did, like of course, same thing. Our first jobs were, if they walked in the door and had money, we took them in.
Right.
And the first time we had to fire a client was one of the biggest learning experiences for us, because we realized we have to evaluate them like they evaluate us. Absolutely. Like we have to be the right fit. Making minimum charges helped us bring in discipline to make sure we're going after the right projects. And we weren't just sort of, that was just one of the things that helped us say, no, that's not going to give us the ability and the time and everything we need to dedicate to something. And it's just not going to work out great. And you learn these things kind of the hard way and patch holes all the way along. And that's what I was saying, like about year 5, where it's kind of like, yeah, we've kind of got a lot of this stuff kind of going. You still have those peaks and valleys. You got to sell, and you got all these other challenges, but some of those systems and processes are in place to just kind of make it run a lot better.
Absolutely. And I think it's, that's why I say that the experimentation mindset says we'll experiment with everything. Every context is a new experiment, but being disciplined around where can you drive the most value? Where can you, which environment allows you to kind of really kind of create value for someone? Being aware of that helps you so much. And just as you called out, the first time you get fired and the first time you fire someone teaches you so much as an entrepreneur. Both are humbling lessons in a lot of ways, and because they're hard conversations in both places. And as I say to everyone, that we only got fired once in our whole 8 years, and God tell me, I mean, I've learned everything that can be learned from that, and we try our level best to not ever do that. And the same thing is, like, we try to fine tune our conversation with prospects and say, can we add value for you? Because if we touch it, we own it, and if we own it, we better do a good job of it.
Yeah. It's those hard lessons are some of the absolute, when I look back now, some of the absolute most important lessons that change the way, like change your mindset. It doesn't just change how you do something, changes your mindset and slows you down oftentimes.
Absolutely.
And make sure you're doing things right.
Absolutely.
This was an amazing conversation. Like I could talk about UX for 2 more hours. But for those of you that are out there listening, I think you've got just a little tidbit of how useful, how important, and how UX could actually transform your products and your services. Also, how risky it is if you don't. So, Satyam, how should people listening track you down if they want to talk with you and just learn more about how you guys can help?
People can just reach out. I mean, I'm always willing and happy to talk to anyone who has a problem in this space. My email is satyam@uxreactor.com. The firm I run is called UX Reactor. You can go to the website, find me on LinkedIn. If you want to know of how we do what we do, I wrote a book earlier, mid last year. That's available on Amazon, other places. It's called User Experience Design, a practical playbook to fuel business growth. So again, there's a lot of places that you can find me, but if you want to do it yourself, the techniques are there. If you want us to kind of talk to you, happy to talk to you. If you just want to kind of pick my brain, happy to even do that.
That's terrific, and I'd encourage people to take Satyam up on that and reach out. And thanks everyone for listening. Again, I'm Blaine Bertsch, co-founder and CEO at Dryrun, and we help businesses forecast their cash flow, model scenarios, forecast that revenue, all those things that, frankly, we were talking about today. Identify those peaks and valleys. That's what we do, and we also help you if you're a CPA that's offering advisory services to your clients. We just help you do the same. Offer those types of services and help those businesses really thrive and grow. So thanks again, Satyam, for joining me. This is such a great conversation, and make sure you look him up on uxreactor.com.
Lovely. Thank you, Blaine.